For more than a decade, they built a life rooted in faith and family.
She was a smart woman. She loved her kids. She was family-oriented.
He was so charismatic.
He also was a man of faith.
Well, God said we got to clean your filth.
But in a split second, their future was torn away in an act of violence.
Kendra!
I need somebody here, please. I need somebody here. Oh, Jesus.
It was unbelievable what happened.
It seemed not even like a nightmare. It wasn't real.
Imagine having two fully involved relationships for 10 years.
Double life. That's a double life.
Did betrayal lead to a desperate plot?
She wanted him all to herself.
Or was there a hidden serpent lurking in the garden?
The story starts to unravel.
When everything is said and done, people always know the truth.
Everything was a lie from the very beginning.
Just to see that many people being manipulated at one time, it's just evil.
June 2015. It's a balmy summer in Macon, a mid-sized city located 85 miles south of Atlanta and known as the heart of Georgia.
It's very affordable, a great place to raise a family.
It's not too country, it's not too city. I think it's the perfect blend.
But just after midnight on June 12th, the quiet city is jolted by an urgent call to the Bibb County Sheriff's Office from local pastor William Pounds.
We'll see the emergency.
Ma'am, my girlfriend, she shot herself in the head. I need an ambulance, please. I need somebody here.
Yes, sir. I can get him en route for you, okay? But I need you to try to calm down for me.
Oh, Jesus.
On the 911 call, William is panicking and Kendra is in dire need of medical attention.
She's not breathing.
Okay. She's
She's not
breathing.
breathing. I'm gonna try to do CPR on her.
Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4,
2,
4,
3,
1,
4,
2,
5,
3,
6,
4,
7,
1,
8,
2,
9,
3.
10.
As William fights to keep Kendra alive, first responders race to the scene. Every second is critical.
As the minutes tick by, Kendra's chances of survival grow dimmer.
For as long as anyone could remember, 46-year-old Kendra Jackson had been a beacon of light in her community.
Kendra was a sweetheart. When she showed up, she brought the sun with her.
People loved her. They say that she was a good mix of sassy and classy.
When you say classy, you say Kendra. You just knew she was gonna look her best, speak her best, present her best at all times.
The daughter of a reverend, Kendra was raised in a devoutly religious household alongside her 3 siblings.
Growing up in a Christian home, especially when your parents are involved in preaching, it can have a big influence on you, and there's a lot of pressure to always do your best.
That kind of defined her trajectory in life.
And nothing in Kendra's life was more important to her than motherhood.
Kendra got married at a young age. Her and her husband had 3 kids.
But the relationship between Ms. Jackson and her husband was not as strong as they had hoped, and they ended up growing apart and divorced.
In the years following the divorce, Kendra worked hard to give her children a good upbringing.
Okay, great.
She was very loving towards her kids. Her kids were the priority.
I'll take care of that for you.
She was able to eventually find a good job as a personal banker. She had a part-time job working in a jewelry store.
I'm like, girl, why you working 2 jobs? Because she was trying to take care of people.
Yeah, a little busy, really quick.
If anyone could handle the stress of motherhood and work, it was Kendra.
Taken care of.
We call her Michelle Obama.
Good afternoon.
Like if she was having a bad day, she would have the classiest bad day ever. She was always in mama mode and let me make it better for you mode.
Kendra was the total package, so it seemed only a matter of time before a new suitor came knocking.
She's maintained her faith that God would provide her a good man.
Can I help you?
Yes, I have some questions about my bank account there.
Okay, let me take a look.
William Pounds was a prominent preacher, and he was also a senior master sergeant in the Air Force.
If he was to walk in, he would immediately grab your attention. He's a good-looking man. He was always well-dressed, well-mannered.
The two of them quickly hit it off.
I hate to be forward, but you mind joining me for dinner on Friday?
I'd like that.
He had, a great resume. He also was a man of faith, which immediately resonated with Kendra.
Within a short period of time, Kendra was smitten, and then when she saw him preach, her love grew even bigger.
But God said we got to clean your filth. You still got some dirt on your nails. But even though you have dirt on your nails, he died. Yeah, before you got your engine running like new, he died.
He was so charismatic.
His congregation loved and adored him.
He was able to breathe his own passion into the Word of God, and Kendra found that absolutely inspiring.
To Kendra, it felt like William could be the one, but she had no intention of racing to the altar.
Kendra's first marriage failed, and she was cautious about running into this one, so her and William took it slow.
This is a new person that you're introducing into your world, your children's world.
They dated more than 12 years.
I think game night went well with the kids.
It did. We should do it again sometime.
He was safe for her, and he was her nice guy. And he created that story for her.
In 2012, William finally popped the question.
Well, I was thinking about doing this somewhere a bit more romantic, but Kendra Jackson, will you marry me?
Yes.
In that moment, she was like, okay, this is the one. This is the man that God sent to me.
Kendra thought all of her dreams were coming true.
But now, a few short years later, the couple's future has been hurled into doubt.
Instead of walking down the aisle, Kendra is barely clinging to life.
William was on the phone with 911 and told investigators that she shot herself in the head.
Damn it, Kendra, why you want to do this to me?
When first responders arrive on the scene, William leads them to the bedroom.
She's over here.
They find her collapsed on the floor in a pool of her own blood.
The first responders immediately jump into action.
The paramedics tried to apply first aid.
Every attempt was made to resuscitate her, but eventually it was clear that it was too late.
Kendra was dead.
For more than a decade, Macon pastor William Pounds had been Kendra Jackson's rock.
William was her handsome knight in shining armor. He was charismatic. He said all the right things.
She was planning a wedding to, a man that she loved.
Until a bullet to the head severed their bond forever.
The paramedics tried to apply first aid, but it became too late.
Kendra was dead.
When investigators from the Bibb County Sheriff's Office arrive on the scene, they step aside with Kendra's grieving fiance.
Sir, I'm sorry for your loss. Do you think you're up to walking us through what happened?
Yeah, I can do that.
Mr. Pound said it started off as a normal day. Him and Kendra and the kids had spent quality time together.
They all had dinner together, and then Kendra drove the kids over to their father's house.
Hurry back.
Kendra returned to the home around 10 p.m.
She came back. Him and her got into bed.
They are watching a basketball game and starting to discuss some of the details of their relationship.
Kendra started pressing him on a date for the marriage.
You know, we've been engaged for a while now. I think it's time that we should start planning the wedding.
She wants her wedding because the whole world around her and William's relationship expects this to happen. Because that is the Christian thing to do.
He told her that he wasn't ready to get married, and she didn't respond well to that.
What do you mean you're not ready? We've been together for like 15 years.
He really loved Kendra, but after so many years, he had felt the relationship had run its course.
William tells investigators that when he broached the subject of ending their relationship, Kendra started to spiral.
All the years that she has invested in their relationship, she feels like she had wasted her time.
Kendra, calm down. We can talk.
Don't tell me to calm down!
He says that she flew into a rage.
Kendra grabbed the handgun off the dresser drawer.
And he thought that she would shoot him.
But instead, Kendra turned the gun on herself.
William told investigators that she shot herself in the left side of the head.
Oh my God!
He goes, attempts to resuscitate, he attempts to do whatever he can.
William said he hurried up and rushed to her side to control the bleeding as he dialed 911.
2, 3, 4.
To the detectives, William looks like a broken man.
He just explained he witnessed his fiancée committing suicide, and that's not an easy thing to cope with.
Thank you.
With any death like this, they have to perform an investigation. But in the case of suicide, it's typically just a formality.
The crime scene has the appearance of a suicide. The victim is lying on the floor with a gun in close proximity. The blood is in the appropriate area. The gunshot appears to match up with the scenario provided by Mr. Pounds.
They did find an entry on the wall from the gunshot wound to her head.
But then investigators discover something else that piques their interest. A second bullet hole.
Looks like another bullet hole into the bed.
Sure does.
So this strikes investigators as odd because based on Williams' recitation of events, she only fired one bullet.
However, detectives know that a traumatic event can play tricks on a witness's mind.
When you have so much adrenaline and stuff rushing through your body, sometimes you can't account for what really happened during that time.
We might have what we call auditory exclusion, which really lessens a person's ability to hear in chaotic situations.
Also, with many suicide attempts, some may fire a practice shot before they work up the courage to turn the gun on themselves.
Having completed their preliminary examination, detectives hand the scene over to their forensic team.
Now, Bibb County investigators have to face the difficult decision of notifying Kendra's loved ones.
Kendra's teenage daughters are with their father.
The children, her ex-husband, are all shocked that Kendra had taken her own life.
Suicide? Are you sure?
It was disbelief, because there was no prior indication that Kendra would be susceptible to committing suicide.
There has to be another explanation.
Our mom would never hurt herself.
The family did not believe that suicide was the cause of her death.
They're convinced there has to be more to this story.
Something's not right with it. And your gut is always right.
Detectives in Macon, Georgia have learned that moments before Kendra Jackson allegedly committed suicide, her fiancé, William Pounds, called off their engagement.
He was starting to have some second thoughts about the future of them as a couple.
William said that she grabbed his .40 caliber pistol,
Kendra!
shot herself in the head.
But now Kendra's loved ones are telling the investigators they find that story hard to believe.
There's no way our mom killed herself.
They didn't believe that she would take her own life.
The family was adamant because it was outside of her character and also her faith.
What about warning signs? Did your mom seem depressed lately?
No, not at all.
Amen.
Kendra's daughters tell investigators they spent the previous day with their mother and William.
They said they didn't feel anything out of the ordinary.
And there was even cause to celebrate because Kendra's youngest daughter had just landed a new job.
They had dinner together to celebrate, and then she dropped them off to their father's house to spend the night.
Kendra made plans the next day to spend time with her daughter and go shopping. It just didn't line up.
Kendra's daughters also echo what William said in his statement. The couple wasn't in agreement about their impending wedding.
He just kept pushing back the wedding.
William and Kendra got engaged in 2012. They initially had planned on getting married in 2014. And when the date came around, William encouraged the couple to push it back even further.
Mr. Pound's explanation for the delay was financial issues.
The couple bickered about it. They had, small discussions. Nothing ever rose to the level of thinking that Kendra would take her life behind it.
By the end of the interview, investigators consider that Kendra Jackson's death may not be an open and shut case.
The fact that her loved ones, the people closest to Kendra, were so adamant that this could not be, that leads investigators to reassess the facts.
Could there be more to the story?
When detectives receive the results of Kendra's autopsy, even more questions rise to the surface.
Mr. Pounds told detectives that Kendra shot herself in the left side of the head. Well, the autopsy clearly disputed that. The evidence showed that she had shot herself in the right side.
Of course, adrenaline was running high. So maybe that was an explanation.
However, like the earlier finding that not one, but 2 bullets were fired inside the couple's bedroom, it's another inconsistency in William's version of events.
Had the chaos played tricks on William's memory, or is the story not adding up?
Police ask William to come into the station for a follow-up interview.
Appreciate you coming in on short notice.
Of course. Anything I can do to help.
William was cooperative and he seemed willing to assist in the investigation.
The night Kendra shot herself, tell me again what you saw.
He tells them again about their argument and how she got up and grabbed the gun from their dresser drawer.
William just concretely says she shot herself on the left side of her head. Now, the investigators know from coroner evidence that that is not true.
At that point, Mr. Pound's story starts to unravel.
Your version of events doesn't line up with the evidence. There were 2 shots fired in that bedroom.
Well, I only remember 1 shot.
Did you alter the scene in any way?
No.
That's when investigators asked William a point-blank question.
Did you shoot Kendra?
Absolutely not.
Despite the inconsistencies in his story, William maintains that Kendra's death was a suicide. But before investigators end the interview, he drops a bombshell.
He tells police officers that he was in another relationship.
because I'm engaged.
He was engaged to someone else, as well as Kendra.
During an interview with police in Macon, Georgia, William Pounds has just made a stunning confession. The 47-year-old pastor tells detectives he called off his wedding with Kendra Jackson because he was engaged to another woman.
This information comes as a huge surprise to investigators.
Who's gonna believe that a pastor is engaged to 2 women? You know, not even believe. Who's gonna even suspect?
According to William, the other woman in his life is a police officer who lives 45 minutes away in Atlanta.
What's her name?
Sierra Brinkley.
It's a discovery that forces the investigators to rethink everything they thought they knew. Could Sierra Brinkley be involved in Kendra's death?
Maybe she wanted William all to, herself.
The fact that she was a police officer, she had access to a weapon that might help her facilitate this type of crime.
Sierra agrees to drive down from Atlanta to meet detectives at the Macon Police Department for an interview.
She confirms that yes, she and William, they are engaged.
She reveals to detectives that they had actually been together for over 10 years.
You said 10 years?
That's right.
I mean, that was like wow.
Double life. That's my first thoughts. That's a double life.
Imagine having 2 fully involved relationships happening an hour away from each other for 10 years. The level of coordination, the level of secrecy that you must maintain.
You're trying to satisfy 2 people. You're trying to take care of 2 homes.
As an investigator, when it comes to Sierra, we want to look, when did she become aware that Kendra existed? Where was she at the time this incident happened?
According to Sierra, Kendra's existence was no secret.
What William had told Sierra is that Kendra was an ex, that they had been broken up, separated for years.
I thought that was the truth up until a few weeks ago.
One day, Sierra decided to drive down to Macon and surprise William at his house.
When Sierra popped up at William's house unannounced, Kendra's there.
Sierra asked her, what are you doing here?
What do you mean, what am I doing here? Who the hell are you?
Kendra held up her finger with a wedding ring on it and said that they was engaged to get married.
So what did you do next?
I confronted William.
Wait, no. Go upstairs. I'll handle this. Go upstairs.
William, what is going on?
Let me explain.
William promises to Sierra that things are over with Kendra.
Look, she just came over to pick up some stuff. Our relationship, it's over. Come on. Don't give me that look. You're my only girl and my soon-to-be wife. Okay?
He says they can start preparing for their marriage by going to premarital counseling, hopefully to resolve some of the issues around honesty and fidelity.
And you agreed to go to counseling?
Yes, I did.
They were due to be married on June 12th, and that was the exact same day that Kendra died.
But as investigators know, instead of walking down the aisle with Sierra, William spent that evening with Kendra.
When she found out that William hadn't ended things with Kendra, Sierra could have flown into a jealous rage.
Did you do it and now William is covering up for you?
When investigators pose that question to Sierra, she immediately denies any involvement in Kendra's death.
Of course, Sierra says no. The last time she was even at William's house was on June 5th, a full week before the incident happened.
As police work on verifying Sierra's statement, detectives receive the completed report from the CSI technicians who processed William's home. And their findings are eye-opening.
When detectives had initially walked through the crime scene, they noticed a bullet hole in the wall, but despite exhaustive searching, the CSI was not able to recover the bullet.
What happened to that bullet that was in there, and why was it pried out of the wall?
The forensic team also failed to recover the second bullet that went through the mattress, or either shell casings.
A closer examination of the comforter and mattress revealed more alarming evidence.
They could tell by the way that the bullet had passed through the comforter that the comforter had been moved after the shots were fired. The bed had apparently been remade in an effort to conceal the bullet hole in the mattress and the comforter and the sheets.
Somebody had tampered with the scene.
The trajectory of the bullet that killed Kendra raises an even bigger red flag.
There was no way that Kendra was standing when she allegedly shot herself in the head. The evidence points to her being on the ground.
Based on these new findings, investigators feel confident that Kendra was murdered.
These are no longer discrepancies that you can attribute to faulty memory. So police believe that William has been lying. He's trying to protect himself or his other woman.
When investigators listen to the 911 call William made on the night of Kendra's death, they make yet another chilling discovery.
You still there with me? Sir?
Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
They noticed that Mr. Pounds muted his end of the call 3 to 4 times.
Hey, partner?
Why would a person in the process of administering first aid, CPR, mute his call?
1, 2, 3. You still there with me? Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Wait, you hear that?
Play that back.
Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
When he unmuted the phone call, you can hear the toilet flushing in the background.
If you are doing CPR, then how are we hearing the flush? What's really going on?
As Macon investigators listen to the 911 call local pastor William Pounds made on the night he alleges his fiancée Kendra Jackson committed suicide, they notice a curious noise in the background.
You still there with me? Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
You can hear the toilet flushing in the background.
They suspect that toilet flushing noise could actually be William flushing down the bullet and the shell casings.
When detectives follow up with the paramedics who responded that night, they poke even more holes in William's story.
William told 911 operators that he performed CPR on Kendra before first responders arrived. But first responders, they said there was no sign of blood on William's clothes, except for a couple tiny specks on his pants.
With the amount of blood on the scene, his hands and his lower shirt should have been covered in blood.
The first responders go on to say that William told them something else in those first frantic minutes.
Their story they got from Mr. Pounds was different than the story that Mr. Pounds told the detective.
He said that he was downstairs, and then he heard the gunshot go off upstairs, and then that's when he ran upstairs.
William told them that he had to kick the door in order to get to Kendra. There was no evidence that the door had been kicked in at all.
As red flags pile up, detectives also start to hear from Kendra's closest confidants. They all agree that her decade-plus relationship with William was nothing short of a roller coaster.
Kendra's friends explained to investigators that William was not this perfect fiancé, perfect man.
William was a liar, he was a manipulator.
He knew he was good looking and he had the gift of gab. I think he felt as though that was a calling card for him to get into any door he wanted to.
She had caught him cheating on multiple occasions.
Who is this?
Kendra.
Who is she?
Phone.
Who is this?
Stop.
What are you doing?
I'm sorry, okay? You know how much I love you. It won't happen again.
To their dismay, friends say Kendra stayed with William despite his philandering behavior.
Even when she knew it was broken, she loved enough to be able, I can put it back together, I can fix it. She really believed that.
Jesus reminds us to forgive.
It's almost like, you know, when somebody's in a Ponzi scam and they keep putting their money into it. And you don't want to tell them not to, but you kind of want to take their checking account. But she kept depositing and he kept taking.
She's already experienced divorce. So maybe Kendra was thinking, I don't want to start over.
Don't worry.
Friends say the couple's engagement offered Kendra a fleeting moment of happiness.
She was proud of her ring, but I think that's all she had, was that ring. It was a shallow happiness.
They would discuss a wedding date, and he would move it or come up with some type of excuse.
Anything that he said was a lie, all of it was a lie. And every day it was killing her. Every day it was taking more of Kendra from Kendra. And she loved so hard that she put blinders on and couldn't even see that she was being stripped from herself.
However, in the past month, friends say Kendra had stopped wearing her engagement ring.
After Kendra found out about Sierra, that felt like the last straw.
Now, not only have you been played by a fool, but you've been playing the fool.
Who are you?
Kendra was done at this point.
What's going on?
In the course of their interviews, detectives learned that William's affair with Sierra Brinkley wasn't the only one.
The investigation reveals that William had been seeing about 5 separate women.
He was stringing them all along, telling each of them that they were the love of his life.
It was disgusting.
When authorities received Sierra Brinkley's phone records, William's last defense finally crumbles.
She was in Atlanta. She was nowhere near Macon when this took place.
She was not at the scene of the crime when it happened.
On August 21st, 2015, Bibb County Sheriff's investigators charged William Pounds with malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault.
William was arrested for Kendra's murder, and he was calm and maintained his innocence.
The family finally has this moment where they can breathe and they have a sense of relief.
But that feeling of relief doesn't last long.
His bond was $500,000. That's a lot. But he reached out to his congregation.
On September 15th, at William's bond hearing, his congregation shows up and rallies around him.
Pastors in the faith community are revered because they are delivering the word of God every week. People truly believe they are instruments of the divine. And so the initial reaction for a lot of people is denial.
They was like, no, he didn't do this. And they went ahead and bonded him out.
Within weeks of his arrest, William is back on the street as a free man.
For Kendra's loved ones, it's an ominous sign of things to come.
It just goes to show just how powerful he is. He feels invincible.
It's almost like he's gotten away with it. He was so charismatic. He tricked them.
By the fall of 2015, Macon police have charged Kendra Jackson's fiancé, William Pounds, with killing her and staging it as a suicide.
William is a respected, beloved pastor, so the congregation is quick to rally money to get him released.
They felt like he was wrongfully accused.
They paid his bond and allowed him to get back out on the street.
Backed by a devoted flock of believers, prosecutors feel that William's conviction is no sure thing.
It can be hard to overcome a defendant's image, especially when someone is seen upright and moral.
In the eyes of the public, William Pounds is a pillar in his community. And so it's gonna be difficult to convince a jury that he's actually a liar, cheater, and a murderer.
But as the trial date approaches, prosecutors receive a helping hand from an unexpected source: William himself.
As a condition of his bond, Mr. Pounds had to wear an ankle monitor so his whereabouts could be monitored. He had restrictions.
He's approved to go to places that, you know, a normal person would need to go. The doctor's office, the grocery store, his home.
However, the powerful pastor has no intention of following the rules.
He was breaking his bond conditions. He was drinking, he was going out to parties like nothing never happened.
Kendra was gone, this sweetheart. These two daughters now don't have a mother. So many people affected. And the nerve of him to celebrate anything ever again in life.
He was clearly violating the conditions of his bond, and he was rearrested.
This is when the congregation started to realize that this is not the church-going man that they all thought he was.
Just to see that many people being manipulated at one time, it's just evil. I felt bad for the people.
When William's trial begins in October 2017, he still remains confident that his pious image will carry him through to a not guilty verdict.
William enters the courtroom with a Bible in his hand.
He's still keeping up with this persona that he's created.
But prosecutors aren't having it.
They contend that William's mountain of lies can prove that he's the killer.
Prosecutors tell the jury that on the night of June 12, 2015, William and Kendra got into an argument.
I noticed you ain't been wearing that ring I gave you.
You damn right I haven't.
Based on the statements from her friends, prosecutors believe that Kendra was done with William.
Why would I wear the ring of a man who's engaged to another woman?
As simmering resentments bubbled to the surface, the couple's argument intensified.
Prosecutors believe that Kendra, having seen William's web of lies firsthand, was going to expose him for a fraud, a liar, a manipulator.
That's right. I'm gonna tell the entire congregation that their pastor is a damn hypocrite.
You know what?
And so instead of taking responsibility for his actions, investigators say that he opted to silence her altogether.
What are you gonna tell now?
What are you doing?
What are you gonna tell now?
What are you doing?
You're not doing anything. Where are you going?
William took his military-issued pistol and fired 2 shots. One that went through the bed and another that went through Kendra's head.
Once Kendra was dead, Mr. Pounds immediately tried to stage the scene so it appeared that Kendra had committed suicide. Mr. Pounds retrieved the bullet from the wall, retrieved the casing from the floor. He took both items into the bathroom and flushed them down the toilet.
Once the jury retires to deliberate, it doesn't take them long to return with their verdict.
William Pounds was found guilty of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault.
William was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
It's a victory for the dedicated investigators who worked tirelessly to bring William to justice. But for Kendra's loved ones, the conviction falls short of healing their wounds.
I don't think there's any amount of time that he could do to repair the pain and the hurt and the brokenness. That doesn't bring Kendra back.
It takes a unique kind of manipulator to prey on so many women.
He did it for arrogance. He did it for nothing. He did it because he felt as though he could get away with it.
While nothing can replace what Kendra's loved ones lost, her legacy continues to inspire them to this day.
Kendra taught me that regardless of what happens, you hold your head high. And when everything is said and done, your love and your life will speak for itself.
Nobody paid attention to the old man walking quietly down the driveway that morning. That image would later become one of the most disturbing photographs in modern criminal history. A 72-year-old grandfather standing beneath the California sun outside an ordinary suburban house in Citrus Heights. Gray hair, slightly hunched posture, calm expression, the kind of elderly neighbor people trusted automatically. Someone who looked more likely to complain about rising gas prices than terrorize an entire state. Children rode bicycles past his lawn for years without fear. Neighbors waved casually while collecting mail. Families slept peacefully only feet away from a man investigators would eventually call one of the most sadistic predators America had ever failed to catch. For 40 years, he disappeared into ordinary life, and nobody saw the monster hiding underneath. Long before the nation knew the name Joseph James D'Angelo, California already lived in fear of something moving silently through suburban darkness. The attacks began during the mid-1970s. First, a strange, isolated incident scattered across Sacramento County. Missing jewelry, open windows, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, women reporting the terrifying sensation that someone had entered their homes while they slept. Police treated most complaints as minor burglaries or neighborhood prowler activity. Annoying, disturbing, but not yet extraordinary. Then the fear started spreading. Women described hearing breathing outside bedroom windows after midnight. Dogs barked suddenly toward empty backyards. Teenagers claimed they saw shadows climbing fences between houses before vanishing into canals or empty lots. Some residents reported finding furniture moved slightly overnight. Others noticed family photographs missing for no obvious reason. Tiny details, tiny violations. But together they create a growing sense that someone unseen was drifting quietly through suburban neighborhoods, watching people from darkness. And then the violence exploded. In June 1976, a masked intruder entered a home in Rancho Cordova before dawn and attacked a young woman while her husband lay helpless nearby. The details horrified investigators immediately. The attacker tied both victims carefully, moved through the house with eerie confidence, threatened murder repeatedly in a calm, controlled voice. Then he stacked dishes on the husband's back and warned he would kill them both if he heard the plates rattle while assaulting the woman for hours. The level of psychological control stunned detectives. This was not random violence. This offender prepared meticulously. He understood fear intimately. And after first major attack, more followed almost immediately. Another home, another couple, another masked intruder emerging from darkness before sunrise. The pattern spread rapidly through Sacramento suburbs as panic infected entire communities. Newspapers called in the East Area rapist. Television broadcasts interrupted regular programming with updates warning women to lock windows and avoid sleeping alone. Gun stores sold out of ammunition. Hardware stores ran out of deadbolts and alarm systems. Families formed armed neighborhood patrols roaming quiet streets after midnight, while police helicopters searched canals and drainage areas repeatedly looking for a predator who always seemed one step ahead. But the most terrifying part was not the violence itself. It was how invisible he remained. Victims described hearing the attacker whisper to himself during assaults, sometimes crying suddenly, sometimes speaking in calm, detached sentences about killing everyone inside the house. Other times, he simply stood silently in bedrooms watching victims panic, while he controlled every movement around them. He often stayed inside homes for hours after attacks, eating food from kitchens, drinking beer quietly, looking through drawers and photo albums while victims lay tied up nearby. It felt personal, intimate, like the intruder enjoyed invading lives more than stealing valuables. And slowly investigators realized something horrifying. The East Area rapists stalked victims long before attacks occurred. Witnesses reported suspicious men lurking near schools, grocery stores, and suburban park stays or weeks before assaults. Women later remembered seeing unfamiliar cars parked repeatedly near homes before being targeted. Some victims even described noticing strange men watching quietly from a distance during ordinary errands, only understanding the significance much later after surviving attacks. The predator hunted patiently. That changed everything, because suddenly every ordinary stranger became suspicious. Every parked vehicle after dark, every unknown face near schools or jogging trails. Fear consumed suburban California throughout the late 1970s while the attacker continued adapting faster than law enforcement could respond. Then investigators uncovered another disturbing possibility. The predator might possess military or police training. The attacks showed tactical discipline difficult to explain otherwise. He avoided fingerprints repeatedly, understood police radio patterns, escaped containment zones before officers sealed neighborhoods fully. He tied complex knots, entered houses through vulnerable points almost instinctively. Some detectives privately admitted the offender behaved less like an ordinary criminal and more like someone trained professionally in procedure and control. But nobody imagined how accurate that suspicion truly was. Meanwhile, the attacks escalated. The East Area rapists moved farther south across California, while assaults became increasingly violent. Couples rather than women alone became primary targets. Victims described waking beneath flashlight beams while masked intruders pointed guns directly into their faces. Survivors remembered hearing the attacker quietly moving through homes before attacks even began, as if he already knew the layout perfectly. Then the murders started. In February 1978, Brian and Katie Majori were shot to death while walking their dog near Sacramento after apparently stumbling across the predator unexpectedly. The killings shocked investigators because they represented something new: escalation. The offender no longer seemed satisfied, controlling victims psychologically through assault alone. Violence was deepening. Soon, Southern California detectives investigating a series of brutal home invasion murders noticed chilling similarities to the East Area rapist attacks hundreds of miles north. Couples attacked during the night. Victims bound carefully. Homes entered silently. A predator who moved with terrifying confidence through suburban neighborhoods before vanishing completely afterward. The media eventually gave the killer another name: the original Night Stalker. But despite mounting bodies and growing panic, law enforcement agencies struggled connecting cases fully because the late 1970s lacked modern forensic coordination systems. Different counties investigated independently. Evidence sharing moved slowly. DNA technology barely existed. Detectives relied heavily on eyewitness descriptions that constantly changed under trauma. And the predator understood that world perfectly. Because hidden beneath the mask and darkness was another horrifying truth nobody knew yet. Joseph James D'Angelo had once worn a police badge himself. Years earlier, he served as a police officer in Exeter and Auburn, California. He understood patrol routines, investigative procedures, response times, radio communications. He knew how officers search neighborhoods because he once participated in those searches himself. And somewhere along the line, something inside him transformed into something terrifying. But during the years of fear, nobody suspected the quiet former officer living an ordinary life while California hunted shadows desperately. The attacks continued to the late 1970s and early 1980s with terrifying unpredictability. Then, almost as mysteriously as the violence began, it stopped. No farewell message. No final attack. Nothing. The predator vanished completely after 1986. Years passed, then decades. The case slowly transformed into one of America's most haunting cold cases. Survivors aged. Detectives retired. Evidence boxes gathered dust inside storage rooms, while victims struggled carrying trauma into ordinary life. Some moved away permanently. Others developed severe anxiety, insomnia, or emotional isolation long before psychological trauma became openly discussed publicly. Entire communities carried invisible scars left behind by a predator nobody could identify. But the ghost never truly disappeared. Advances in DNA testing during the 1990s eventually confirmed investigators' growing suspicions. The East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker were the same offender. One man connected to dozens of rapes, burglaries, and murders across California. Still no name, still no face, just a phantom drifting through criminal history untouched. Until one revolutionary forensic breakthrough changed everything. Genetic genealogy. Investigators uploaded crime scene DNA into public ancestry databases, searching not for exact suspects, but distant family connections. The idea sounded almost impossible at first. Instead of catching criminals directly through fingerprints or existing police databases, detectives could identify relatives unknowingly connected through genealogy websites designed for ordinary people researching family history. And suddenly, the invisible predator started becoming visible. A partial DNA match led investigators toward extended family trees branching across generations. Detectives spent months narrowing possibilities carefully until one name emerged repeatedly from the evidence. Joseph James D'Angelo, former police officer, Vietnam veteran, grandfather, quiet suburban neighbor. The realization stunned investigators who spent careers chasing the ghosts haunting California for 40 years. Surveillance teams moved immediately. Detectives watched the elderly man outside his Citrus Heights home while secretly collecting discarded DNA from trash connected to him. Then came the final confirmation. The DNA matched perfectly. After 4 decades of fear, violence, and unanswered trauma, America's most wanted predator was finally standing in plain sight all along. The panic spread faster than the police could control it. By late 1977, entire neighborhoods across Northern California were living under siege from a predator nobody could see and nobody could stop. Every creaking floorboard after midnight became a threat. Every barking dog sent families rushing toward windows with baseball bats and flashlights. Women slept with knives hidden beneath pillows. Husbands stayed awake through the night gripping loaded revolvers while staring toward dark hallways, terrified the East Area Rapist might already be inside the house watching them breathe. And sometimes, the attacks became more frequent, more calculated, more psychologically devastating with every passing month. Detectives studying crime scenes noticed patterns, so disturbing they began changing how law enforcement understood serial predators entirely. This offender did not simply break into homes. He rehearsed them. He studied neighborhoods weeks in advance. He prowled backyards silently during the night, testing gates, unlocking windows, hiding shoelaces and ligatures near future targets long before attacks occurred. Victims later described horrifying moments that only made sense after surviving assaults. A strange man staring too long inside grocery stores. Anonymous hang-up calls in the middle of the night. Footprints near bedroom windows. Missing items nobody noticed immediately. The predator was entering lives slowly before violence ever began, and the fear became unbearable. Police task forces expanded rapidly across Sacramento County as pressure mounted from terrified communities demanding answers. Helicopters swept suburban neighborhoods nightly, while officers established surveillance operations near canals and bike trails frequently used by the attacker to escape unseen. Hundreds of tips flooded police departments weekly. Suspicious vehicles, peeping Toms, strangers knocking on doors pretending to ask directions. Every ordinary interaction became contaminated by paranoia. Yet somehow the predator kept slipping away. One night, investigators nearly caught him. After another brutal assault in Stockton, patrol officers flooded surrounding streets within minutes, while helicopters searched from above. Witnesses reported seeing a man running through backyards near a drainage canal. Officers closed roads quickly. 9 units tracked footprints through muddy fields. For several minutes, police believed the nightmare might finally end. Then the trail vanished completely. No suspect, no arrest, nothing. The failure devastated investigators because the attacker seemed to disappear almost supernaturally whenever police closed in. Detectives reviewing escape routes noticed something chilling. The East Area Rapist understood containment procedures better than many officers coordinating the searches themselves. He anticipated perimeter locations, new response times. used canals, parks, schoolyards, and construction zones strategically to move unseen through suburban environments. Some detectives privately wonder whether the offender monitored police radio communications directly. Others suspected military experience. Nobody guessed the truth was even worse. The double life became one of the most horrifying aspects of the case later, not because it was unique, because it looked so ordinary. Meanwhile, survivors struggled carrying trauma few people truly understood during the late 1970s. Many victims described feeling abandoned emotionally after attacks because society often misunderstood sexual violence completely during that era. Some investigators asked insensitive questions. Neighbors whispered rumors. Families encouraged silence rather than public discussion. Victims frequently felt isolated beneath crushing shame and fear, while the predator remained free. But the psychological damage extended far beyond individual attacks. Entire communities changed permanently. Parents stopped allowing children outside alone after sunset. Couples installed floodlights and alarm systems across quiet suburbs once considered safe. Gun ownership surged dramatically in affected neighborhoods. Local businesses advertised self-defense classes specifically for women terrified by nightly news reports describing another home invasion, another assault, another family shattered before dawn. And through all of it, the predator evolved. Investigators noticed subtle behavioral changes over time. Early attacks showed nervousness occasionally. The offender whispered frantically, panicked unexpectedly at noises outside houses. But later assaults revealed growing confidence, greater control. He stayed longer inside homes, spoke more calmly, moved with terrifying certainty through victims' private spaces, as though convinced nobody could stop him anymore. That confidence soon turned deadly. In February 1978, Brian and Katie Majori walked their dog through a Sacramento neighborhood on an ordinary evening when they likely encountered something horrifying unexpectedly. Witnesses later reported hearing gunshots echo through the area before discovering the young couple murdered near a residential fence line. Detectives believe the Majoris accidentally interrupted the East Area rapist while he prowled nearby searching for another victim. The realization chilled investigators instantly. The predator was no longer merely assaulting victims during carefully controlled invasions. Now he was willing to kill suddenly to protect himself. The escalation intensified pressure on law enforcement dramatically. California newspapers described the offender as a phantom moving invisibly through suburban life, while police appeared powerless to stop him. Television anchors warned viewers nightly about locking windows and reporting suspicious activity immediately. Rumors spread constantly. Some communities believed multiple offenders operated together because one man seemed incapable of committing so many crimes while remaining uncaptured. But it was one man, always one man. And Joseph D'Angelo continued learning from every successful attack. Investigators eventually discovered the predator frequently telephoned victims months or even years after assaults ended. Survivors answered phones late at night, only to hear heavy breathing, before whispered threats returned them instantly to moments of terror they desperately tried forgetting. Some women changed addresses repeatedly, trying to escape fear psychologically, only for anonymous calls to begin again later. The predator wanted permanent control, even after attacks ended physically. That psychological warfare became his signature. Then, as the years passed, the violence spread south. Southern California investigators began connecting a horrifying series of murders involving bound couples attacked inside homes during nighttime invasions. Victims were bludgeoned savagely. Houses showed signs of meticulous planning and surveillance beforehand. Detectives noticed similarities impossible to ignore. The same tactical movement, the same obsession with domination and fear. The same careful escape methods, leaving almost no forensic evidence behind. The East Area rapist had transformed. Now newspapers called him the original Night Stalker. And still nobody knew his identity. One detective later described the investigation as hunting smoke with flashlights. That was how impossible the predator seemed during those years. He appeared suddenly, destroyed lives, then vanished completely before dawn, while terrified communities begged for answers law enforcement could not provide. Meanwhile, D'Angelo's personal life continued evolving quietly. He married, raised children, attended family gatherings. Neighbors described him afterward as moody sometimes, angry occasionally, but never monstrous, never unforgettable. Just another suburban husband growing older beneath California sunlight, while buried beneath ordinary routine, lived one of America's most elusive serial predators. That contradiction would later horrify the country more than almost anything else. Because evil was not hiding in abandoned warehouses or dark alleyways. It was mowing the lawn next door. By 1981, the murders intensified again. Couples across Southern California were attacked inside supposedly safe suburban homes, while investigators scrambled desperately to establish patterns before more people died. The killer entered houses through unlocked doors or windows quietly during nighttime hours, often attacking sleeping victims before they fully understood what was happening. One surviving witness described hearing footsteps moving calmly through the house before violence erupted. Another remembered the killer standing silently beside the bed, watching them for several seconds before speaking. That detail haunted investigators deeply. The predator enjoyed anticipation, enjoyed control, enjoyed the terror before violence itself. And then suddenly, after years of bloodshed and panic consuming California, the attack stopped. 1986. No explanation, no arrest, no body discovered. Nothing. The original Night Stalker disappeared completely into ordinary American life, while victims and investigators remained trapped inside unanswered nightmares for decades afterward. Some detectives refused retiring emotionally from the case. They continued reviewing evidence long after official assignments ended, convinced the predator would eventually make a mistake. But years passed without answers. Then more years. New crimes replaced old headlines. Younger generations barely recognized the names East Area Rapist or Original Night Stalker anymore. Yet, somewhere in suburban California, Joseph James D'Angelo kept living quietly, waiting, aging, invisible, and buried inside police evidence lockers sat one thing he could never fully erase: DNA. The DNA sat inside evidence lockers for decades like a ticking bomb nobody knew how to use. Tiny biological traces recovered from crime scenes across California during the 1970s and 1980s. Invisible fragments left behind by a predator who believed time itself would protect him forever. Detectives preserved the evidence carefully through years when forensic science barely understood the power hidden inside human cells. Back then, investigators relied on fingerprints, eyewitness sketches, shoe prints, blood typing. DNA technology sounded almost futuristic during the height of the East Area Rapist investigation. But while Joseph James D'Angelo disappeared quietly into suburban life, science kept evolving, and eventually, the future caught up with him. By the 1990s, forensic laboratories finally confirmed what many detectives already suspected: the East Area Rapist. The original Night Stalker, the Visalia ransacker linked to earlier burglaries and murders near Central California. One offender, one predator evolving through years of escalating violence across the state. Still no name, still no arrest, only a ghost drifting through criminal history, while victims age beneath unanswered trauma. Some survivors refused speaking publicly anymore. Others became obsessed with the case, following every new development, desperately hoping for closure before death reached them first. Families of murder victims spent decades trapped emotionally between grief and uncertainty, while retired detectives carried private frustration into old age, knowing one of America's worst serial predators escaped completely. Then the internet changed criminal investigations forever. Genealogy websites exploded across America during the early 2000s as millions of ordinary people mailed saliva samples searching for ancestry information. People wanted to discover distant relatives, ethnic backgrounds, forgotten family histories. They uploaded DNA willingly into massive databases, never imagining law enforcement might someday use those same systems to hunt killers hidden among them. At first, the idea sounded almost impossible. Then investigators started testing it quietly. One cold case detective described the concept later as building a criminal suspect backward through bloodlines. Instead of searching directly for offenders already listed in police databases, investigators searched for distant relatives connected genetically through family trees. The technique became known as forensic genealogy. And for old unsolved cases, it was revolutionary. In 2018, investigators working the Golden State Killer case uploaded crime scene DNA into a public genealogy database called GeneMatch. They did not expect immediate miracles. The DNA profile produced no exact match initially, but detectives discovered something potentially explosive instead. Distant relatives, cousins, family connections branching outward across generations. The task force began constructing enormous family trees manually, tracing births, marriages, deaths, military records, census data, and geographic movement patterns stretching back more than a century. It became an enormous puzzle hidden inside American genealogy itself. Thousands of names, thousands of possibilities. But slowly the branches narrowed. Male, correct age range, lived in California during attacks. Military or police background possible. Eventually one name surfaced repeatedly beneath the evidence. Joseph James D'Angelo, former police officer, former Navy mechanic, resident of Citrus Heights. The realization stunned investigators immediately, not because the name was famous, because it was painfully ordinary. After 40 years hunting a mythical predator haunting California nightmares, detectives suddenly faced an elderly suburban grandfather living quietly in plain sight. No dramatic criminal empire, no hidden bunker, no isolated cabin deep in mountains. Just a small suburban house with trim grass and ordinary curtains. Surveillance teams mobilized immediately. Investigators watched D'Angelo constantly while trying desperately to avoid alerting him before final DNA confirmation. Detectives followed him through grocery stores, parking lots, sidewalks, restaurants. They observed him loading groceries into vehicles and walking calmly through suburban neighborhoods while carrying one of the darkest secrets in modern criminal history. Some investigators later admitted the experience felt surreal. The Golden State Killer looked normal. That was the terrifying part. One detective watched D'Angelo talking casually with neighbors beneath afternoon sunlight and reportedly whispered, "How many times have we walked past monsters without realizing it?" Meanwhile, the task force prepared carefully for the final step. They needed discarded DNA, something D'Angelo touched and abandoned publicly without realizing investigators were watching. The opportunity came quickly. Surveillance officers recovered items discarded from D'Angelo's trash outside the home quietly during nighttime collection operations. Forensic teams rushed the samples into laboratories while detectives waited through unbearable hours knowing history might be seconds away from changing forever. Then the results arrived. Perfect match. After 4 decades of fear, rape, murder, and unanswered trauma, the ghost finally had a name. The arrest operation launched before sunrise on April 24th, 2018. Police vehicles surrounded the Citrus Heights neighborhood silently while tactical officers prepared outside D'Angelo's suburban house. Investigators feared the former police officer might react violently if cornered. After all, this was a man who spent decades escaping capture while terrorizing entire communities. A predator known for tactical awareness and control. But when officers confronted him, the monster looked old, fragile, confused almost. Neighbors emerged from home stunned as police arrested the elderly man, living quietly among them for years. News helicopters circled overhead, while national media exploded instantly with breaking headlines announcing the unimaginable. The Golden State Killer had been caught, and he was 72 years old. The reaction across America felt almost surreal. Survivors cried openly during interviews after spending lifetimes believing justice would never arrive. Retired detectives who dedicated careers chasing the killer broke down emotionally before cameras. Families of murder victims gathered around televisions, unable to process the reality that the predator haunting California for 40 years had finally been identified. But perhaps nobody experienced greater shock than the neighbors living beside Joseph D'Angelo himself. He mowed the lawn every week, one resident told reporters. Another described him as quiet but harmless, a grandfather, an ordinary older man. That contradiction terrified people nationally because it shattered comforting assumptions about evil itself. Society wants monsters to appear monstrous. Dangerous people should look dangerous. predators should stand out clearly before violence begins. Joseph DeAngelo proved the opposite. The Golden State Killer survived for decades precisely because he looked forgettable. Then investigators searched his house. The details emerging afterward only deepened the horror. Firearms, old maps, evidence connected psychologically to crimes. Detectives also uncovered signs suggesting DeAngelo followed developments in the investigation obsessively for years. He reportedly searched online articles discussing the Golden State Killer case and understood modern forensic advances threatening exposure eventually. One chilling discovery emerged later from jail, recordings secretly captured after his arrest. DeAngelo sat alone inside his cell, whispering to himself. "I pushed him out," he muttered softly. "I pushed Jerry out." Investigators believe Jerry referred to an alternate personality or internal identity connected to crimes. Whether genuine psychological fragmentation or manipulative performance remained debated heavily afterward. But the recordings disturbed profilers deeply because the predator appeared almost haunted by the violence buried inside him for decades. Yet survivors cared less about psychological explanations than accountability. For 40 years, they carried invisible scars while the man responsible attended birthdays, family dinners, and suburban neighborhood gatherings unnoticed. Some victims spoke publicly for the first time after the arrest. Women, now elderly, described waking decades earlier beneath flashlight beams while believing they would die before sunrise. Husbands recalled helpless terror listening to whispered threats while tied beside loved ones. Families describe how trauma poisoned entire lives long after physical injuries healed. And all of them asked the same question repeatedly. How did he hide for so long? The answer was terrifyingly simple. Because Joseph James DeAngelo understood trust better than most ordinary people ever would. He understood neighborhoods, routine, normalcy. He knew fear disappears quickest when danger looks familiar. That understanding became his camouflage. And for 40 years, it worked perfectly. The arrest did not end the nightmare. In many ways, it reopened it. For decades, survivors of the Golden State Killer buried memories beneath ordinary life because they believed the predator would never be caught. Some stopped following the case entirely just to survive emotionally. Others convinced themselves the man responsible was probably dead already, hidden forever beneath anonymous graves or forgotten somewhere in America. But on April 24th, 2018, everything changed instantly. The ghost came back to life. Television screens across the country flooded with Joseph James DeAngelo's booking photograph, while reporters repeated the same horrifying details over and over again. Former police officer, Vietnam veteran, grandfather, neighbor, arrested for a series of crimes so brutal entire California communities once lived in fear of sleeping at night. And suddenly survivors were dragged backward through time. Phones rang nonstop inside trauma counseling centers after the arrest announcement. Women who spent 40 years trying to forget heard the killer's name publicly for the first time and collapsed emotionally. Some victims reportedly vomited after seeing his face on television. Others sat frozen in silence, staring at screens, unable to reconcile the ordinary old man in handcuffs with a mass predator who once whispered death threats inside dark bedrooms before dawn. One survivor later described the moment simply, "I realized he'd grown old while we stayed trapped in that night forever." That sentence spread everywhere after the arrest because it captured something deeply horrifying about the case. Joseph DeAngelo moved on with life. His victims never fully could. Meanwhile, investigators began reconstructing the hidden decades between the murders and the arrest, trying to understand how America's most wanted predator disappeared so completely into suburban normalcy. The picture emerging behind closed doors unsettled even veteran detectives. DeAngelo had not lived secretly. He lived openly. He attended family gatherings, worked ordinary jobs, argued with neighbors over small disputes, raised children, rode motorcycles, shopped in grocery stores, walked through parks. Nothing about his public existence resembled the terrifying mythology surrounding the Golden State Killer, and that contradiction disturbed people nationally more than the crimes themselves. Because if evil could look that ordinary, what else was hiding unnoticed around them? Reporters flooded Citrus Heights immediately after the arrest, interviewing stunned neighbors who struggled processing the revelation. Some described D'Angelo as irritable or strange occasionally, but never dangerous. Others remembered him gardening quietly or sitting alone in garages listening to music. One neighbor admitted she often waved to him while walking her dog and later cried uncontrollably after learning the truth. "He looked like somebody's grandfather," she whispered during one interview. He was somebody's grandfather. That reality complicated the case emotionally in ways many Americans found difficult to understand. D'Angelo was not frozen in time as a faceless predator from old newspaper headlines. He aged, built relationships, created a family. The monster who terrorized California eventually became an elderly man arguing about lawn maintenance and shopping for groceries beside ordinary people. But beneath that suburban life, the darkness never disappeared. Investigators soon uncovered evidence suggesting D'Angelo followed developments in the Golden State Killer investigation obsessively for years. Internet search records, articles, and witness accounts painted a picture of a man deeply aware that advances in forensic science threatened exposure eventually. Detectives believed he monitored public discussion surrounding DNA technology carefully, while understanding modern genealogy methods could someday identify him. That possibility haunted him, and perhaps for good reason, because by the time of his arrest, forensic genealogy was changing criminal investigations across America dramatically. Cold cases once considered unsolvable suddenly reopened nationwide, as detectives realized public ancestry databases created entirely new pathways toward hidden offenders. Families seeking genealogy information unknowingly helped investigators identify violent criminals who escaped justice for decades. The Golden State Killer became the most famous example, but not the last. Meanwhile, prosecutors faced another challenge entirely. How do you try crime spanning for decades while survivors age, witnesses disappear, and evidence stretches across multiple counties and jurisdictions? Some victims had died before the arrest ever happened. Retired detectives returned voluntarily to assist prosecutors preparing one of the most complex criminal cases in modern American history. And behind the scenes, investigators continued uncovering chilling details about Joseph D'Angelo himself. Former co-workers described explosive anger hidden beneath his quiet exterior. Neighbors recalled sudden screaming episodes inside the house late at night. One former police chief remembered firing D'Angelo from the Auburn Police Department years earlier after he was caught shoplifting dog repellent and a hammer from a hardware store in 1979. At the time, the incident seemed bizarre but minor. Later it felt terrifying, because the firing happened during the height of the East Area Rapist attacks. Investigators began wondering whether losing his police career intensified the violence psychologically. Some profilers believed humiliation and rage fueled later murders committed in Southern California after D'Angelo's dismissal from law enforcement. The timeline fit disturbingly well. But perhaps the most chilling discovery involved the hidden duality of his personality. Family members described D'Angelo as volatile privately yet ordinary publicly. He reportedly screamed alone inside garages for hours sometimes. Others remembered bizarre mood swings and controlling behavior. Yet outside the home, he blended into suburban environments almost perfectly. That ability to compartmentalize horror became central to understanding the Golden State Killer psychologically. He separated violence from identity, created walls inside himself, and for decades, nobody broke through them. Then came the interrogation footage. Investigators released limited details publicly, but law enforcement sources described D'Angelo behaving strangely after arrest, at times silent, at times confused, occasionally muttering to himself about another internal personality named Jerry. Some experts dismiss the behavior as manipulation designed to appear mentally unstable. Others believe decades of psychological fragmentation finally surfaced after capture destroyed the carefully controlled mask protecting him. Either way, one truth became unavoidable. The predator feared exposure long before the arrest happened, because after 40 years escaping justice, technology finally cornered him. Survivors, meanwhile, prepared emotionally for courtroom proceedings many never believed possible. Some rehearsed victim statements for months. Others refused attending entirely, unable to reopen wounds buried beneath decades of trauma. Prosecutors coordinated testimony carefully because many victims were now elderly themselves, carrying physical and emotional scars from crimes committed when they were young adults. And through all of it, America watched obsessively. The Golden State Killer case became more than criminal history. It became symbolic of something deeper, a collision between old violence and modern science, a reminder that time no longer guaranteed protection for hidden predators. Investigators across the country suddenly reopened forgotten cold cases with renewed urgency, wondering which ghost might finally receive names through DNA genealogy next. But inside California courtrooms, the atmosphere felt far more personal. Victims entered hearings and saw Joseph DeAngelo sitting quietly only feet away from them, not masked, not invisible, just an old man beneath fluorescent lights, while decades of terror collapsed finally into human form. Some survivors later admitted the reality felt disappointing almost. They expected a monster. Instead, they found someone painfully ordinary, and that terrified them more, because ordinary faces disappear easily into crowds. Ordinary neighbors avoid suspicion. Ordinary grandfathers wave politely while hiding unimaginable darkness beneath suburban routine. That was the true horror surrounding Joseph James DeAngelo. Not simply what he did, but how completely normal he looked afterward. Then, during one courtroom appearance, something happened that chilled everyone present. A victim described hearing the killer whisper softly during an assault decades earlier. The phrase haunted her entire life. She repeated it publicly for the first time, while staring toward DeAngelo seated silently beside defense attorneys. And suddenly, the old man lowered his head slightly, almost like recognition. The courtroom fell completely silent, because for one brief moment, survivors realized something horrifying. The monster was still in there. The courtroom felt colder every time another survivor spoke, not because of the air conditioning, because every testimony dragged the past back into the room alive. For decades, the crimes of the Golden State Killer existed inside police files, crime scene photographs, faded newspaper headlines, and whispered late-night conversations between retired detectives who never stopped thinking about the case. But now, inside a Sacramento courtroom packed with reporters, victims, investigators, and families, the horror became human again, one voice at a time, one memory at a time. And sitting silently at the center of it all was Joseph James DeAngelo. The old man barely moved during hearings. He appeared frail sometimes, motionless, wheelchair-bound during certain appearances. His expression remained empty while survivors described nights that destroyed entire lives. Some observers believed he looked detached. Others thought he listened carefully beneath the stillness. But everyone noticed one unsettling detail repeatedly. He almost never looked directly at the victims. Perhaps because hearing the truth spoken aloud shattered the illusion of invisibility he protected for 40 years. Survivors described waking suddenly beneath flashlight beams while masked intruders stood silently beside beds in the darkness. Women recalled hearing plates stacked carefully on their husbands' backs before assaults began. Men described the unbearable helplessness of listening to whispered death threats while tied up beside people they loved. And throughout every statement, the same theme emerged again and again. The fear never ended. One woman testified she still checked windows obsessively every night, even 40 years later. Another survivor admitted she slept with lights on for decades because darkness itself became unbearable after the attack. Husbands described carrying guilt into old age because they could not stop the violence unfolding only feet away from them. The Golden State Killer did not merely assault victims physically. He poisoned their sense of safety permanently. And perhaps that was his true weapon all along. Fear. Pure, sustained fear stretching across generations. Meanwhile, prosecutors continued reconstructing DeAngelo's hidden life. During the years, California hunted him desperately. Investigators traced old employment records, military documents, police disciplinary files, and witness accounts trying to understand how one man maintained such terrifying control over two separate identities. By day, Joseph DeAngelo blended into suburban America. By night, he became something else entirely. Former co-workers remembered strange bursts of rage beneath his quiet personality. Neighbors recalled hearing violent screaming from inside garages late at night. Family acquaintances described unpredictable mood swings that made people uncomfortable without understanding why. But nobody connected those moments to the mass predator terrorizing California, because nobody wanted to believe monsters could exist so close to ordinary life. One investigator later described D'Angelo as a man living in camouflage made of normalcy. That phrase stayed with many people after the trial because it explained something deeply uncomfortable about serial predator society often misunderstands. The most dangerous offenders rarely look dangerous. They survive precisely because they appear ordinary enough to disappear. And Joseph D'Angelo disappeared better than almost anyone. As hearings continued, investigators revealed chilling new details about the scale of surveillance conducted by the Golden State Killer before attacks. Detectives believed he prowled neighborhoods repeatedly weeks before selecting victims permanently. He entered yards quietly, studied routines, learned work schedules, noticed which homes left blinds open at night. Some survivors later discovered missing items hidden around properties months before assault occurred, evidence suggesting the predator prepared psychologically long before violence ever began. He invaded lives slowly, methodically, like a parasite moving unnoticed beneath skin. And then came one of the most haunting revelations of the entire case. During searches connected to the investigation, detectives uncovered evidence suggesting D'Angelo kept souvenirs from crime for years after attacks ended. Stolen jewelry, personal items, fragments connected emotionally to victims who spent decades unaware pieces of their lives remained hidden inside the killer's private world. That discovery devastated survivors profoundly because it meant the predator never truly left them behind emotionally. He carried pieces of their fear forward through time. One woman later told reporters, "He continued living with memories we spent our lives trying to escape." The psychological weight of that realization spread far beyond the courtroom. America became obsessed with understanding how someone could commit such extreme violence while maintaining ordinary family life simultaneously. Psychologists debated whether D'Angelo compartmentalized his identity deliberately or experienced genuine psychological fragmentation over time. But survivors cared less about theory than accountability. For them, the case was never abstract. It was personal. And finally, after 40 years, the predator had nowhere left to hide. Then prosecutors introduced evidence connected to D'Angelo's law enforcement background. The courtroom atmosphere shifted immediately, because suddenly many unexplained mysteries surrounding the crime started making horrifying sense. The tactical movement, the escape routes, the awareness of police procedure, the ability to avoid forensic mistakes repeatedly during an era before modern DNA testing existed. Joseph D'Angelo did not merely evade law enforcement. He understood it from the inside. Former officers testified about his employment history in Exeter and Auburn, California. Records revealed disciplinary problems, angry confrontations, and the infamous shoplifting incident leading to his firing in 1979. Prosecutors argued the humiliation and collapse of his police career aligned disturbingly with escalation in violence afterward. The timeline painted a terrifying portrait, a failed officer becoming one of America's most elusive predators. And through all of it, D'Angelo remained mostly silent. No dramatic confession, no emotional breakdown, no explanation satisfying enough to answer the question haunting survivors for decades. Why? Why these victims? Why the cruelty? Why the obsession with terror itself? But perhaps the most chilling answer came not from D'Angelo directly, but from FBI profilers studying the case afterward. They concluded the Golden State Killer attacked not primarily for sexual gratification or even violence alone. He attacked for domination, control over fear, control over life itself. That need explained the stalking, the rehearsals, the whispering, the hours spent inside homes long after assaults ended. He wanted victims completely trapped inside his psychological world. And for decades, they were. The trial also exposed another disturbing reality. Many victims believed they would never receive justice because time itself seemed to protect the killer. Detectives retired, evidence aged, witness memories faded. Some families died before arrests ever happened. The Golden State Killer case became symbolic of countless cold cases buried beneath decades of frustration and unanswered grief. until DNA changed everything. Forensic genealogy transformed criminal investigations almost overnight after D'Angelo's arrest. Police departments nationwide reopened forgotten cases once considered unsolvable. Detectives suddenly realized hidden predators who escaped justice for decades might now be vulnerable through family DNA databases and modern technology. The ghost haunting California had become a warning to every unidentified killer still alive. Time no longer guaranteed safety. And somewhere inside the Sacramento courtroom, survivors understood that better than anyone, because after 40 years of silence, the monster was finally forced to listen. Then came one of the most emotional moments of the entire proceedings. A survivor approached the microphone slowly, hands trembling visibly. Her voice cracked repeatedly as she described the night the Golden State Killer entered her home decades earlier. She explained how the attack destroyed relationships, trust, sleep, peace, every ordinary certainty people depend on daily without thinking. Then she looked directly toward D'Angelo and asked a question nobody in the courtroom could answer. How many lives did you think you were allowed to steal before someone finally stopped you? The silence afterward felt endless, because buried beneath that question was the true horror of the Golden State Killer case. For 40 years, nobody did stop him. The closer investigators looked at Joseph James D'Angelo's life, the more terrifying the illusion became. Nothing about the suburban house in Citrus Heights screamed serial predator. No hidden torture chambers. No dramatic walls covered in maps and newspaper clippings like something from a Hollywood thriller. The property looked painfully ordinary. A quiet home aging beneath decades of California sunlight. Slightly overgrown grass. Faded paint. Tools inside the garage. Family photographs. Normal. That was the word investigators kept repeating afterward. Normal. And somehow that frightened them more than anything else. Because inside that ordinary life existed a man connected to more than 50 rapes, 13 murders, and a reign of terror so intense entire California communities changed permanently because of him. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. How could someone commit such unimaginable violence and still function inside ordinary society for 40 years without collapsing publicly? Psychologists studying the case believe the answer lived inside D'Angelo's obsession with control. He controlled victims, controlled fear, controlled appearances, controlled himself, at least outwardly. But behind closed doors, cracks existed. Family members later described explosive outbursts hidden beneath his quiet public image, sudden screaming fits, violent rage over minor frustrations. Neighbors recalled hearing him shouting furiously inside the garage late at night, while nobody else seemed present. One former co-worker described D'Angelo as someone who carried anger boiling just beneath the surface all the time. Yet the world still failed to see the predator clearly, because people often mistake familiarity for safety, and Joseph D'Angelo understood that instinct better than most. Meanwhile, courtroom testimony continued exposing the staggering psychological damage left behind by the Golden State Killer's crimes. Survivors spoke about marriages collapsing under trauma, panic attacks lasting decades, fear of darkness, fear of silence, fear of sleeping. Some victims admitted they still checked closets and windows obsessively before bed, even 40 years later. The attacks never truly ended for them. They simply evolved into memory. One woman described hearing footsteps outside her house years after the assault and immediately dropping to the floor in terror before realizing it was only a neighbor walking nearby. Another survivor admitted she avoided living alone her entire adult life because the idea of sleeping in an empty house remained unbearable after the attack. The Golden State Killer stole something deeper than physical safety. He stole normal life itself. And perhaps that was why the case haunted America so powerfully after the arrest, because the crimes revealed how fragile ordinary safety really is. Families once believed locked doors protected them. Quiet suburbs protected them. Good neighborhoods protected them. Then the East Area rapist shattered those assumptions completely. He entered homes silently, watched families sleeping, moved through bedrooms like a ghost while entire communities remained unaware. And after decades passed, the ghost turned out to be a grandfather living quietly beside ordinary neighbors. That realization poisoned public trust psychologically in ways difficult to measure. Then prosecutors revealed another chilling detail. Investigators believe D'Angelo often revisited neighborhoods connected to earlier attacks years after crimes occurred. Some witnesses remembered seeing unfamiliar older men lingering near streets, where assaults once happened long after the original investigations faded from headlines. Detectives suspected the predator returned periodically, reliving memories privately while victims continued struggling with trauma nearby. The thought horrified survivors, because it meant the killer might have walked unnoticed through the same communities, still grieving his crimes. Watching, remembering, invisible. The psychological profile emerging during the trial painted D'Angelo as a man addicted not merely to violence, but to domination itself. FBI analysts explained how the Golden State Killer rehearsed attacks mentally long before entering homes physically. The prowling, the surveillance, the phone calls, the stolen personal items, all part of a ritual centered around power and fear. He wanted ownership over victims emotionally, even years later. That need explained why survivors continued receiving disturbing phone calls months or years after assaults ended. Some women answered telephones late at night only to hear breathing before whispered threats dragged them instantly back into terror. Others reported hearing phrases spoken during original attacks, repeated decades later by anonymous callers. The predator wanted reminders, wanted fear to survive permanently, and for many victims, it did. Meanwhile, national media coverage surrounding the case intensified daily. News stations replayed old crime scene footage beside images of elderly Joseph D'Angelo entering courtrooms in handcuffs. Younger generations discovering the case for the first time struggled understanding how one man evaded capture for so long while committing crimes on such a massive scale. Retired detectives answered that question repeatedly during interviews. Different era, different technology, no DNA databases, no surveillance cameras everywhere, no internet connecting police departments instantly. During the 1970s, serial offenders often vanished across county lines because communication between jurisdictions remained painfully fragmented. The Golden State Killer exploited those weaknesses expertly. He changed regions, adapted methods, escalated carefully while investigators struggled connecting patterns quickly enough to stop him. And hidden beneath everything was one horrifying advantage. He understood police procedure firsthand. That reality became even more disturbing after investigators revisited D'Angelo's law enforcement background in greater detail. Former colleagues described him as intelligent, disciplined, and unsettlingly controlled. Some remembered unusual confrontations with civilians during routine police work. Others recalled moments of aggression that felt excessive even then. But nobody imagined the scale of darkness hidden beneath the badge. One retired officer later admitted the revelation destroyed his trust permanently. If someone wearing a uniform could do this, he said quietly, how are we supposed to recognize him? That question echoed far beyond California after the arrest. Because Joseph D'Angelo did not survive through supernatural intelligence. He survived through invisibility, ordinary invisibility. And perhaps that remains the most frightening lesson of the entire case. The monster looked exactly like everyone else. Then came the victim statements that shook the courtroom hardest. A husband described hearing his wife cry softly beside him while both remained tied up during assault decades earlier. He explained how the sound haunted him every day afterward because he could do nothing to stop it. Another survivor described staring at the killer's eyes through flashlight shadows and realizing with absolute certainty that he enjoyed their fear more than the violence itself. That detail stayed with jurors repeatedly throughout the proceedings. Enjoyment, not rage, not impulse. Control, calculated emotional destruction carried out methodically over years. And still Joseph D'Angelo remained mostly expressionless while listening. Some observers believed he appeared emotionally disconnected from the testimony. Others thought the silence itself revealed something darker, a man who spent decades suppressing emotion, so completely he no longer reacted normally at all. But then, during one hearing, witnesses noticed something strange. As prosecutors described forensic genealogy and the DNA evidence leading to his arrest, D'Angelo's posture changed subtly for the first time. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes shifted downward, tiny movements almost invisible unless someone watched carefully. And suddenly investigators understood something important. The one thing the Golden State Killer never truly prepared for was the future. He escaped detectives, escaped witnesses, escaped fingerprints in patrol cars and helicopters, and decades of investigations. But he could not escape science forever, because while Joseph DeAngelo aged quietly inside suburban America, forensic technology evolved relentlessly in the background. Every year, DNA analysis improved. Every year, databases expanded. Every year, cold case investigators gained new tools capable of dragging hidden predators into the light. The killer believed time protected him. Instead, time destroyed him. And sitting inside that courtroom beneath fluorescent lights and national headlines, Joseph James DeAngelo finally faced the one thing he spent 40 years avoiding: exposure. The fear never really left California. Even decades after the attack stopped, survivors still felt it lingering quietly beneath ordinary life like a scar hidden under skin. Some neighborhoods changed permanently after the Golden State Killer disappeared. People installed heavier locks, motion lights, alarm systems. Entire suburban communities developed habits rooted in terror long after newspapers stopped printing headlines about the East Area rapist. Because once people understand someone can enter their homes silently while they sleep, safety never feels the same again. And now, sitting inside courtrooms packed with cameras and reporters, survivors were finally confronting the man responsible face-to-face after 40 years of silence. Joseph James DeAngelo looked smaller than the monster they remembered. That contradiction haunted many victims emotionally during the trial. They spent decades imagining the predator as something larger than human, a shadow, a nightmare, a faceless force moving through darkness. But the reality sitting before them looked old, frail, weak almost. Yet survivors understood something the public sometimes struggled grasping. Age did not erase what he had done. One woman described seeing DeAngelo in court for the first time and feeling physically sick because his eyes remained familiar even after 4 decades. Another victim admitted hearing his breathing during hearings triggered panic instantly, dragging her psychologically back into the bedroom where the attack occurred years earlier. Trauma does not measure time normally. For survivors, the past remained alive, and every courtroom appearance reopened wounds many spent lifetimes trying desperately to close. Meanwhile, prosecutors continued exposing the horrifying scope of the Golden State Killer investigation itself. Detectives revealed how many attacks likely went unreported entirely due to fear, shame, or lack of forensic understanding during the 1970s. Some victims never contacted police. Others withdrew cooperation after insensitive treatment by investigators unfamiliar with trauma psychology at the time. The real number of crimes might never be known completely. That possibility disturbed even veteran detectives. Because the confirmed attacks alone shattered California psychologically, what hidden violence remained buried forever inside forgotten memories and unreported fear. Investigators also revisited DeAngelo's earliest known criminal behavior connected to the Visalia ransacker series years before the East Area rapist attacks officially began. During the mid-1970s, dozens of bizarre burglaries plagued Visalia, California. Homes were entered silently at night, personal items stolen randomly, drawers rearranged. Victims reported hearing prowlers moving through neighborhoods after dark. Sound familiar? Because it was the beginning. The predator was evolving already. One murder linked to the Visalia crimes involved a journalism professor named Claude Snelling, shot while trying to stop a masked intruder kidnapping his teenage daughter from their home in 1975. At the time, investigators failed connecting the killing fully to later crimes committed across California. But after DeAngelo's arrest, many detectives became convinced a murder represented an early stage of the Golden State Killer's transformation into something far more dangerous. The violence escalated slowly over years. Burglary, stalking, sexual assault, murder, each stage building toward the next. And hidden beneath the progression was a terrifying level of patience. Joseph DeAngelo did not erupt suddenly into violence. He developed into it carefully. That realization fascinated criminal profilers studying the case after the arrest. Experts believe the Golden State Killer experienced intense psychological gratification, not merely from attacks themselves, but from preparation beforehand, the prowling, the surveillance, the planning, the invasion of personal space long before victims even realized danger existed. Control started before contact, and it continued long afterward. That pattern explained why so many survivors described feeling watched for months before assaults occurred. Strange phone calls, missing objects, open gates, unfamiliar vehicles parked nearby repeatedly. The predator inserted himself into victims' lives gradually, like a shadow stretching slowly across the floor. Then, when fear fully matured, he struck. Meanwhile, the national obsession surrounding the case intensified dramatically as more details emerged publicly. Documentaries flooded streaming platforms. Podcasts revisited old evidence. Retired detectives became media figures overnight, while younger generations discovered the horrifying history behind the Golden State Killer for the first time. But for victims, the publicity carried complicated emotions. Some appreciated renewed attention because it validated decades of suffering society once ignored. Others hated seeing trauma transformed into entertainment for audiences consuming true crime stories safely from couches and smartphones. One survivor expressed frustration bluntly during an interview. "People call it fascinating," she said quietly. "For us, it was life." That sentence cut through the spectacle surrounding the case with devastating clarity. Because behind every forensic breakthrough and dramatic headline existed real people carrying irreversible damage across 40 years. And still Joseph DeAngelo remained mostly silent. No full confession. No detailed explanation. No apology capable of answering the question haunting investigators endlessly. How could someone live beside ordinary families for decades while hiding so much violence internally? The answer perhaps emerged slowly through fragments uncovered after his arrest. Former acquaintances described DeAngelo as intensely controlling privately, easily angered, obsessive about routines. Some relatives reportedly feared provoking him emotionally because minor frustrations triggered disproportionate rage. Yet those same people often struggle reconciling the angry family man with the legendary serial predator dominating national headlines afterward. Again and again, the same contradiction appeared. Normal, not normal. Human, monster. The line separating those identities terrified people because Joseph DeAngelo crossed it so completely without detection. Then investigators revealed another disturbing possibility. They believed the Golden State Killer may have listened to media coverage about himself obsessively throughout the years. Some profilers suspected he enjoyed watching communities panic publicly, while knowing he remained invisible inside ordinary life. The fear, the confusion, the endless police failures, all of it reinforced his belief that he controlled the narrative completely. For decades, he did, but DNA changed the rules permanently. And nowhere became that reality clearer than during testimony explaining how forensic genealogy finally cornered the killer after 40 years. Prosecutors described investigators building enormous family trees through distant relatives who uploaded ancestry information online, completely unaware their DNA would eventually expose one of America's most notorious predators. The courtroom listened in silence as experts explained how a few microscopic biological traces preserved since the 1970s survived long enough for modern science to identify the man responsible. One tiny strand of DNA destroyed 40 years of invisibility. That fact unsettled many observers deeply because it transformed the Golden State Killer case into something larger than one predator finally captured. It became proof that cold cases once considered hopeless might still breathe, quietly beneath old evidence boxes, waiting for technology to catch up. Across America, detectives reopened forgotten investigations after DeAngelo's arrest. Unidentified killers who believed time protected them suddenly faced a terrifying new reality. Every discarded cigarette, every old rape kit, every preserved blood sample stored decades earlier now carried new potential danger. The dead were speaking again through science. And somewhere inside the Sacramento courtroom, survivors understood the meaning of that better than anyone. Because while Joseph DeAngelo aged peacefully through suburban life, their evidence waited patiently for him. Then came one of the most haunting moments of the proceedings. A prosecutor displayed photographs from the 1970s showing frightened neighborhoods covered in warning posters and newspaper headlines about the East Area rapist. Streets once filled with children suddenly empty after dark. Community meetings packed with terrified residents demanding protection. Armed husbands standing guard through sleepless nights, while women cried, openly describing attacks to reporters. The images looked almost apocalyptic. An entire state psychologically terrorized by one invisible man. And sitting only feet away from those photographs was a quiet old grandfather responsible for all of it. Still silent. Still ordinary looking. Still terrifying. By the time Joseph James DeAngelo finally stood before the court, California had spent more than 4 decades haunted by a ghost. Not a legend. Not a rumor. A real man who entered homes silently while entire neighborhoods slept believing walls and locked doors would protect them. They didn't. And now, after 40 years of fear, survivors were no longer speaking to a faceless predator hidden somewhere in darkness. They were speaking directly to him. The man who stole peace from hundreds of lives while growing old quietly beneath suburban sunlight. The victim impact statements began slowly at first. Then the floodgates opened. One survivor described waking every night at exactly 3 a.m. for decades because that was the hour the attack happened. Another admitted she never again allowed herself to sleep beside open windows, even during unbearable California summers. A husband explained how his marriage collapsed beneath invisible trauma because neither he nor his wife could ever fully escape what happened inside their bedroom that night. The courtroom listened through absolute silence. No dramatic music. No television narration, only trembling voices carrying 40 years of buried fear. Some survivors cried openly while speaking. Others sounded emotionally detached, almost mechanical, as if they separated themselves psychologically from the memories just to survive retelling them. But every testimony carried the same unbearable truth. The Golden State Killer never truly disappeared from their lives, even after the attack stopped. Even after decades passed, he remained there quietly inside nightmares, panic attacks, broken relationships, insomnia, and fear woven permanently into ordinary routines. That was the real scale of the damage. And sitting only feet away from them was Joseph DeAngelo, expressionless beneath fluorescent courtroom lights. The contrast felt surreal. This elderly man in a wheelchair once crawled through dark suburban neighborhoods, hunting victims like prey. This quiet grandfather once whispered death threats into terrified ears, while families lay bound helplessly beside him. The mind struggled connecting those realities together, but the survivors never doubted. They remembered. One woman stared directly toward DeAngelo and spoke with a calmness that unsettled everyone in the courtroom more than screaming ever could. "You were never God," she said quietly. "You were just a coward hiding in the dark." The statement spread across national media almost instantly because it shattered something essential about the mythology surrounding the Golden State Killer. For decades, fear transformed him into an almost supernatural figure, an invisible phantom who outsmarted police, vanished without mistakes, and escaped justice forever. But now survivors stripped away the legend publicly. What remained was simply a man, a deeply violent man, a deeply damaged man. A predator who spent 40 years hiding behind ordinary life because exposure terrified him more than anything. Meanwhile, prosecutors continued revealing details showing how profoundly the crimes changed California itself during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Police departments reorganized investigative procedures because of the case. Communities developed new neighborhood watch systems. Media coverage surrounding home security exploded nationally. Women altered daily routines permanently out of fear generated by the East Area rapist attacks. One retired detective testified that entire counties forgot what peace felt like during the height of the investigation. That was the scale of the terror, not isolated crimes. Mass psychological warfare carried out by one invisible predator, moving silently across suburban California. Then came testimony surrounding the murders. The atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted immediately. Families of homicide victims sat gripping photographs, while prosecutors described the final moments of couples attacked inside supposedly safe homes. Bound, bludgeoned, executed before sunrise by a masked intruder who entered neighborhoods without warning and vanished before police arrived. The details devastated the room. Some relatives lowered heads, unable to listen further. Others stared directly at D'Angelo throughout the testimony, as though trying to force him emotionally to confront what he had done. But the old man remained mostly motionless, and somehow that stillness made him more frightening. Because after everything exposed publicly, decades of violence ruined lives, murdered couples, shattered communities, Joseph D'Angelo still appeared emotionally sealed away behind invisible walls built over a lifetime. Then prosecutors played excerpts from recorded jail conversations secretly captured after his arrest. The courtroom froze. D'Angelo's voice sounded old, weak, almost confused at moments. He muttered strange fragmented thoughts to himself while alone inside the cell. At one point, he whispered repeatedly about Jerry, the mysterious internal figure investigators believed represented either an alternate personality or a psychological compartment connected to crimes. "I pushed Jerry out," he murmured softly. The recordings disturbed even experienced investigators because they revealed something deeply fractured inside the man sitting before them. Some psychologists believe D'Angelo created internal separation mechanisms, allowing him to compartmentalize violence from ordinary life. Others argued behavior was manipulative performance designed to appear mentally unstable after capture. But survivors largely dismissed those debates because whatever explanation existed psychologically, the crimes were real, the suffering was real, and the fear lasted 40 years. That was what mattered. Outside the courthouse, media frenzy surrounding the case intensified daily. Reporters from around the world flooded Sacramento covering every hearing, while documentaries, books, and podcasts dissected the Golden State killer investigation endlessly. Younger generations discovering the case struggled understanding how one offender escaped for so long before DNA genealogy finally cornered him. Older Californians understood immediately. They remembered the panic, the helicopters, the locked windows, the fear of hearing footsteps after midnight. One former resident of Sacramento described sleeping with a loaded shotgun beside the bed for nearly 10 years after the attacks because nobody felt safe anymore. And perhaps that was the most terrifying part of the entire case. The Golden State Killer did not merely attack individuals. He attacked trust itself, trust in neighborhoods, trust in safety, trust in ordinary life. Then the trial revealed another haunting reality. Some survivors spent decades blaming themselves for surviving. One woman admitted she replayed tiny decisions from the night of the assault over and over for 40 years, wondering whether she somehow caused the attack unknowingly. Another victim confessed she avoided discussing the crime publicly because shame consumed her despite doing nothing wrong. That emotional burden enraged many younger observers watching proceedings because it exposed how society often failed victims repeatedly during earlier decades. Many survivors received little psychological support after attacks occurred. Some investigators misunderstood trauma completely. Others focused more heavily on physical evidence than emotional devastation. The Golden State Killer exploited those weaknesses too. He thrived inside silence, inside fear, inside the social discomfort surrounding sexual violence during that era. And for decades, that silence protected him. But not anymore. Because now survivors control the narrative publicly for the first time. One after another, they stood before microphones reclaiming voices terror once stole from them. Some addressed D'Angelo directly. Others spoke to families, to investigators, to younger generations who never experienced the panic consuming California during those years. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from a survivor who paused quietly before saying something that left the courtroom speechless. "For 40 years, she whispered, you made us afraid to sleep." The silence afterward felt endless because everyone understood exactly what she meant. The Golden State Killer invaded the one place human beings are supposed to feel safest, home. And after decades of darkness, survivors were finally forcing the monster responsible to sit still and listen while the fear returned to him instead. By the summer of 2020, the world finally saw something many believed would never happen. Joseph James D'Angelo admitted the truth, not through a dramatic confession, not through tears, not through remorse, but through a cold sequence of guilty pleas delivered inside a packed Sacramento courtroom, while survivors sat only feet away watching a man who haunted their lives for 40 years finally surrender to reality. The Golden State Killer was no longer a ghost. He was a convicted predator. And yet, even during the plea hearings, the atmosphere felt deeply unsettling because D'Angelo continued behaving like a man trapped behind invisible walls. His voice sounded weak, controlled, almost detached from the monstrous history prosecutors recited aloud before the court. Murder after murder, assault after assault, decades of terror reduced to formal charges spoken into microphones beneath fluorescent lights. The contrast felt surreal. One moment the courtroom discussed brutal home invasions that shattered California psychologically. The next moment cameras showed an elderly man sitting silently in a wheelchair adjusting a face mask. It looked impossible, but the survivors knew better than anyone how dangerous appearances could be. For 40 years, appearance protected him. Now appearance meant nothing. As prosecutors outlined the full scale of the crimes publicly, even seasoned journalists covering the hearings appeared shaken. Investigators described how D'Angelo stalked victims for days or weeks before attacks, how he rehearsed movements through neighborhoods, how he studied escape routes in advance, how he phoned survivors afterwards simply to reopen fear long after physical violence ended. Everything revolved around control, absolute control. One prosecutor described the Golden State Killer as a man addicted to terror itself. That description stayed with many people because it explained something essential about the case. D'Angelo did not merely seek victims. He cultivated fear carefully like a weapon, and California lived beneath that weapon for years. Then came the details surrounding the murders in Southern California. The courtroom atmosphere darkened instantly. Victims' relatives sat clutching tissues while prosecutors described sleeping couples attacked before sunrise inside homes they believed were safe. Blunt force trauma, blood-covered bedrooms. Children left orphaned overnight, while communities woke to another headline announcing another nightmare nobody could stop. The original Night Stalker, the East Area Rapist, the Visalia Ransacker. 3 names hiding one predator moving silently across decades. And all along, Joseph D'Angelo returned home afterward to ordinary suburban life. That reality remained almost impossible for public to process fully. One retired detective later admitted the case permanently changed how he viewed strangers. "You stopped trusting normal," he said quietly. Perhaps that was the true legacy of the Golden State Killer. Not simply violence, but contamination. The contamination of ordinary life itself. Because after D'Angelo's arrest, millions of people looked differently at neighbors, co-workers, and quiet men walking through grocery stores unnoticed. Society wants evil to announce itself clearly. Dangerous people should look dangerous. Monsters should appear monstrous. But Joseph D'Angelo looked like someone helping carry groceries across parking lots. That contradiction haunted the country long after the arrest. Meanwhile, survivors continued delivering impact statements that transformed the courtroom emotionally. One woman described spending decades sleeping with lights on because darkness triggered panic immediately after the assault. Another explained how she avoided relationships entirely because trust became impossible after the attack. Then a victim's husband stood before the court and described hearing his wife cry softly during the assault while he lay tied up, unable to move. The courtroom fell silent. Even D'Angelo lowered his eyes briefly. For many survivors, those moments mattered more than the guilty plea itself. They wanted the predator forced to hear the damage publicly, forced to sit motionless while victims reclaimed voices terror once stole from them. And for the first time in 40 years, he could not escape. No bicycle trails, no drainage canals, no dark suburban streets leading back into invisibility. Only courtroom walls closing around him slowly while the past returned one memory at a time. Then prosecutors introduced evidence showing how close investigators came to identify him years earlier without realizing it. That revelation stunned many observers. During the original investigations, witnesses repeatedly described traits matching D'Angelo closely. Military background possible, Police knowledge likely. Aggressive behavior patterns. Similar geographic connections. At one point, some investigators even suspected law enforcement involvement generally because the offender understood patrol tactics so well. But Joseph D'Angelo still slipped away. The reason was terrifyingly simple. Nobody looked hard enough at ordinary men. The Golden State Killer case exposed a deeply uncomfortable truth about human psychology. People often ignore danger when it wears familiar faces. Neighbors receive trust automatically. Police officers receive trust automatically. Grandfathers receive trust automatically. D'Angelo weaponized that instinct perfectly. And for decades, it worked. Outside the courtroom, survivors gathered quietly after sharing stories many never discussed publicly before. Some met fellow victims for the first time despite living through identical terror decades earlier. Others embraced retired detectives who spent entire careers refusing to abandon the case even after hope seemed impossible. The emotional atmosphere surrounding the proceedings became overwhelming sometimes. Court staff reportedly cried during testimony. Journalists covering the hearings described sleepless nights after listening to survivors recount attacks in graphic detail. Even veteran homicide investigators admitted certain statements haunted them afterward, because beneath every crime scene photograph existed something larger: a stolen future, marriages destroyed, children raised by traumatized parents, lives redirected permanently by fear. The Golden State Killer's violence rippled outward across generations, and all of it originated from one man hiding behind suburban normalcy. Then came perhaps the most symbolic moment of the entire case. A prosecutor displayed side-by-side photographs inside the courtroom. On one side, terrified newspaper headlines from the late 1970s warning Californians about the East Area rapist. On the other, Joseph James D'Angelo sitting silently in custody 4 decades later. The room stared at both images together. Fear, then exposure. The contrast felt almost cinematic. An invisible predator transformed finally into an aging man beneath courtroom lights. Not immortal, not supernatural. Caught. And yet even then, survivors admitted closure remained complicated. Some expected relief after the arrest, but instead felt old trauma reopening unexpectedly. Others realized justice arriving 40 years late could never fully restore what the killer stole originally. Time moved forward, but fear stayed frozen. One victim explained it best during testimony. "You took our youth," she said quietly toward D'Angelo, "and now you sit there old." The sentence hit the courtroom like a physical blow, because everyone understood the tragedy hidden inside those words. Joseph D'Angelo lived long enough to become elderly. Some victims never received that chance. Others survived physically but lost decades emotionally to panic, trauma, and sleepless fear. The Golden State Killer aged peacefully through ordinary American life, while the people he attacked carried invisible prisons inside themselves. And now, finally, the illusion protecting him had collapsed forever. Then Judge Michael Bowman prepared to speak. The courtroom became completely silent, because after 40 years of terror, decades of investigation, and thousands upon thousands of sleepless nights across California, judgment had finally arrived. The sentence arrived after 40 years of silence. Inside the Sacramento courtroom, survivors sat shoulder to shoulder beneath harsh fluorescent lights, while cameras captured one of the most extraordinary moments in modern criminal history. Some victims held photographs. Others stared directly ahead. Emotionally exhausted after weeks of testimony, reopening nightmares buried for decades. Retired detectives filled rows behind them, older now, gray-haired, many carrying memories of crime scenes that haunted entire careers. And at the center of it all sat Joseph James D'Angelo, the man once known only as the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Golden State Killer. Now, just an old man waiting for judgment. Judge Michael Bowman spoke calmly, but the weight inside every sentence felt crushing. One by one, he outlined the devastation stretching across California for decades. Lives shattered, communities terrorized, families destroyed. The judge described D'Angelo's crimes not as isolated acts of violence, but as a campaign of fear so extensive it permanently changed how people understood safety itself. The courtroom remained completely silent. Then came the word survivors waited a lifetime to hear. Multiple consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. The sentence itself was expected. Few doubted the outcome after the guilty pleas, and overwhelming evidence. But hearing the punishment spoken aloud transformed the impossible into reality finally. The Golden State Killer would die in prison. No more hiding. No more escaping into darkness. No more suburban anonymity, protecting him behind ordinary life. For many survivors, the moment felt surreal rather than triumphant. Some cried quietly. Others appeared emotionally numb. A few simply closed their eyes as though trying to absorb the reality that the nightmare haunting them since the 1970s had finally reached an ending, or at least the closest thing to one. Because the truth many survivors admitted privately afterward was painful. Justice does not erase trauma. It does not restore lost decades. It does not repair marriages destroyed by fear or give murder victims their futures back. What it does offer is acknowledgement, validation, proof that the horror was real and that the man responsible could no longer pretend otherwise. And perhaps after 40 years, that mattered more than revenge. Then something unexpected happened. Joseph D'Angelo spoke. The courtroom leaned forward instantly. For years he remained largely silent, expressionless through hearings while victims described unspeakable trauma only feet away from him. Many believed he would never acknowledge the crimes publicly in any meaningful way. Yet now, in a frail voice almost swallowed by the silence surrounding him, D'Angelo addressed the courtroom briefly. "I've listened to all your statements," he said softly, "each one of them, and I'm truly sorry to everyone I have hurt." That was it. No explanation, no detailed confession, no revelation unlocking the mysteries investigators chased for decades. Just a few quiet sentences from a man who spent 40 years hiding behind masks, darkness, and suburban normalcy. Some survivors rejected the apology instantly, calling it empty and meaningless after so much suffering. Others admitted hearing any acknowledgement at all felt emotionally significant even if forgiveness remained impossible. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. The apology came far too late. Outside the courthouse, national media exploded with coverage analyzing every detail of the sentencing. Reporters debated whether D'Angelo's statement sounded sincere or performative. Psychologists dissected his body language. Former detectives reflected publicly on investigations spanning entire careers. Across America, people watched courtroom footage repeatedly try to understand how one man maintained such terrifying secrecy for decades. And underneath every discussion lingered the same chilling question. How many more are still out there? Because the Golden State Killer case transformed criminal investigations permanently after the arrest. Forensic genealogy suddenly emerged as one of the most powerful law enforcement tools in modern history. Cold cases long considered unsolvable reopened nationwide. Detectives revisited evidence boxes collecting dust for decades, wondering whether hidden DNA profiles might finally expose other predators living quietly among ordinary communities. And in many cases, they did. The success of the D'Angelo investigation triggered a wave of arrests connected to cold cases across the United States. Murderers who believed time protected them suddenly faced exposure through distant relatives uploading ancestry information online. Cases buried for 30 or 40 years returned to life overnight through microscopic biological traces, waiting patiently inside forgotten evidence lockers. The dead were speaking again, through science, through DNA, through technology that did not exist when many victims originally died. But none of those future cases could erase the singular horror surrounding Joseph D'Angelo himself. Because unlike many serial offenders who spiral into chaos publicly over time, D'Angelo achieved something far more disturbing. He blended in perfectly. Neighbors remembered him arguing about lawn maintenance. Co-workers remembered him complaining about ordinary frustrations. Family members remembered birthday parties, barbecues, quiet evenings. Meanwhile, hidden beneath those memories lived one of America's most prolific predators. That contradiction unsettled people globally because it shattered comforting assumptions about evil. Society teaches people to watch for danger in dark alleyways and abandoned streets. But the Golden State Killer case revealed something much more frightening. Sometimes danger eats dinner beside family members before quietly going to bed in suburban neighborhoods. Then investigators released additional details surrounding D'Angelo's behavior after the attacks ended during the mid-1980s. Detectives believed he simply stopped killing and transitioned fully into ordinary domestic life. No dramatic breakdown, no public confession, no visible unraveling. He just stopped, and that possibility disturbed profilers deeply, because it suggested the predator retained complete control over his hidden identity all along. The murders were not uncontrollable impulses, exploding randomly from madness. They were choices, calculated choices repeated over years before being buried beneath ordinary life. Once the risk of capture increased, that realization changed how many experts viewed serial offenders entirely. The Golden State Killer was not a mindless beast incapable of functioning socially. He was organized, disciplined, strategic, a man capable of compartmentalizing horror with terrifying efficiency. And for decades, that strategy worked. Meanwhile, survivors slowly returned home after sentencing, carrying emotions difficult even for them to understand fully. Relief mixed with exhaustion, closure mixed with grief. Some admitted the case consumed so much of their identities over 40 years that its ending felt strangely disorienting. One victim described leaving the courthouse and suddenly realizing she no longer needed to check the news obsessively every week searching for updates about the killer. Another survivor said she slept peacefully for the first time in decades after the sentencing hearing ended, not because fear vanished completely, but because the ghost finally had walls around him. Steel walls, prison walls, real walls replacing the imaginary one survivors spent 40 years building emotionally around themselves. Then retired detectives gathered quietly outside the courthouse after proceedings concluded. Some embraced each other. Others stood silently staring toward cameras flashing in the distance. Many spent entire careers chasing the Golden State Killer unsuccessfully before retirement forced them away from the investigation. Yet they never stopped thinking about him. One former investigator fought tears while speaking to reporters afterward. "We promised the victims we would never quit," he said. "Today we kept that promise." That sentence carried enormous emotional weight because for decades a Golden State Killer represented failure as much as fear. Failure to protect communities. Failure to identify the predators sooner. Failure to stop the violence before more victims died. But now, after 40 years of darkness, science accomplished what thousands of patrol cars, helicopters, detectives, sketches, and manhunts never could. It unmasked the invisible man. And somewhere inside a California prison cell, Joseph James D'Angelo finally confronted the one reality he spent his entire life avoiding. The world knew exactly who he was. Long after the courtroom emptied, the fear remained. Not the same fear California lived with during the late 1970s when helicopters circled suburban neighborhoods and families slept beside loaded weapons waiting for footsteps in the dark. That fear belonged to another era now, a different America, a different generation. But the shadow left behind by the Golden State Killer never disappeared completely. Because some crimes do not end when arrests happen. Some crimes echo. And Joseph James D'Angelo's violence echoed across decades, across families, across entire communities that spent years wondering whether the predator watching from darkness would ever finally be caught. Now he sits alone inside a prison cell. An old man, a convicted killer, a former police officer whose name became permanently fused with one of the most terrifying criminal investigations in American history. No more masks. No more prowling through suburban streets after midnight. No more anonymous phone calls whispering terror into sleeping homes. Just silence. Cold prison silence replacing 40 years of hidden movement through ordinary life. Yet even after sentencing, investigators admitted publicly that certain questions may never receive answers. Nobody knows the full extent of D'Angelo's crimes with complete certainty. Detectives suspect additional burglaries, assaults, and prowling incidents connected to him likely vanished forever into forgotten police reports and fading memories. Some survivors may never even realize a man responsible for terrifying encounters decades earlier was the Golden State Killer himself. The complete truth died slowly over time. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses pass away. Memories fracture beneath trauma and years. That uncertainty lingers like smoke around the edges of the case even now. And perhaps that is what makes the story feel so haunting long after the conviction ended. Because despite the guilty pleas, despite the DNA evidence, despite the life sentences and national headlines, Joseph James DeAngelo never truly explained himself. No full confession ever arrived. No dramatic revelation unlocked the darkness completely. The public saw fragments only. Pieces of a predator who spent decades hiding behind carefully constructed normalcy, while entire communities suffered nightmares connected to his crimes. And maybe that missing explanation terrifies people most of all, because human beings desperately want monsters to make sense. We want reasons, motives, warnings, something clear enough to separate evil from ordinary life safely. But the Golden State Killer case destroyed that illusion completely. Joseph DeAngelo was ordinary life. That was the camouflage. That was the horror. He attended family gatherings while victims struggled sleeping. He stood in grocery store lines while detectives chased shadows. He aged peacefully through suburban American life while survivors carried panic attacks, broken trust, and invisible scars stretching across decades. And nobody recognized him. Not neighbors, not coworkers, not strangers passing him on sidewalks beneath California sunlight. The monster survived because he looked familiar. That truth spread far beyond the courtroom after sentencing. Criminal profilers, psychologists, journalists, and retired detectives all returned repeatedly to the same disturbing realization. Society often imagines evil as something obvious. Wild eyes, threatening behavior, unmistakable danger radiating visibly from certain people. Reality is quieter. Reality mows lawns. Reality waves politely from driveways. Reality hides behind ordinary routines so effectively that entire communities overlook the darkness standing directly beside them. Joseph DeAngelo became the embodiment of that fear. And even now, years after the arrest, the legacy of the Golden State Killer continues reshaping criminal investigations worldwide. Forensic genealogy revolutionized cold case work permanently after the case exploded across international headlines. Detectives everywhere began reopening forgotten investigations with renewed hope, believing hidden predators who escaped justice decades earlier might finally be vulnerable through advancing DNA technology. And many were. Across America, long unsolved murders suddenly received names. Families spent decades grieving without answers before late-night phone calls from detectives changed everything. Evidence boxes untouched since the 1970s reopened beneath fluorescent laboratory lights, while tiny biological traces, preserved through time, exposed killers who believed they escaped forever. The dead started speaking again. Quietly, through DNA, through science, through microscopic fragments, surviving long after memories faded. And every one of those breakthroughs carried echoes of the Golden State Killer investigation behind it. But for survivors, the legacy feels far more personal than scientific progress or criminal justice reform. For them, the story lives inside ordinary moments. Locking windows before bed, hearing footsteps outside late at night, waking suddenly from old nightmares that still feel real after 40 years. Some survivors admitted publicly that they still struggle trusting silence. Others described lingering anxiety whenever home alarms malfunction or unfamiliar vehicles park outside their houses too long. Trauma rewires ordinary life slowly, invisibly, permanently. The Golden State Killer understood that. He understood fear survives longer than violence itself. And perhaps that is why his crimes haunted California so profoundly for generations. Not because of body counts alone, but because he invaded the one place human beings are supposed to feel safest, home. Then came another chilling realization investigators discussed quietly after the case closed. If DNA technology had not evolved, Joseph James DeAngelo likely would have died free. That fact unsettled many detectives deeply. One of America's most prolific predators came terrifyingly close to escaping justice forever simply because science arrived slightly too late. Had genealogy databases not expanded, had evidence not been preserved carefully decades earlier, had one tiny biological sample degraded beyond usefulness, The Golden State Killer might still be anonymous today, a ghost buried beneath suburban history. That possibility transformed the case into something larger than criminal investigation alone. It became a warning about time, about forgotten evidence, about predators aging quietly among ordinary populations while cold cases gathered dust inside storage rooms across the country. Somewhere, investigators realized, other invisible monsters still existed, waiting, hidden behind ordinary faces, just like Joseph DeAngelo once was. And perhaps that is why the story refuses to fade completely from public memory. Because the Golden State Killer case forces people to confront something deeply uncomfortable about the world around them. Evil does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives smiling politely. Sometimes it borrows the face of a neighbor. Sometimes it spends decades unnoticed beneath ordinary American life until science finally tears the mask away. Then one day the headlines appear. Cold case solved. DNA match. Former cop arrested. Quiet grandfather exposed as serial predator. And suddenly the impossible becomes real. Tonight, somewhere in California, old survivors still check locked doors before sleeping. Some habits never disappear completely. Some fears survive long after courtroom lights fade, and reporters move on to newer stories. But one thing changed forever after April 2018. The ghost haunting California finally received a name. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, a predator who hid in plain sight for 40 years believing darkness would protect him forever, until one microscopic strand of DNA dragged a monster into the light.